All right, welcome everybody. This is Dr. Group with Global Healing. Today I have a very special guest, a really good friend of mine, Dr. Patrick Porter. I met him actually recently at a little health symposium that we were both speaking at, and it really opened my eyes and my knowledge to the information and the amazing cutting edge brainwave entertainment technology that he's been working on. He's been into this for years, over 30 years. He's a Ph.D. scientist. I mean, the list of accolades go on, but he's just a really, really down to earth, good person to know. And that's the kind of people that I really like to hang out with, and because they really care about society. They really care about helping people. And right now, this is one of the number one issues that we're having and we're seeing right now: the amount of fear, the amount of anxiety, the amount of roller coaster rides, just straight up emotional roller coaster rides people are going through. And people sometimes don't realize the effects that harmful organisms, chemicals, toxins, the news, people around you have on your brain waves. So I'm really excited for Dr. Porter to come on and talk about BrainTap. I mean, BrainTap is a device that his company developed. I personally, my whole family uses it. Every single morning we get up and we all do a session. It can be anywhere between 15 to 20 minutes. You can do alpha training, theta training, gamma training. I'll let him get into all that. But welcome, Dr. Porter. It's great to have you on today. It's great to hear from you, and I'll let you just take it from here.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Group. That was great for letting me in with your group here. I'm very privileged to be able to share with them. Just got to get my screen to share here. You should be seeing it now.
Yep.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and give you the background of what we're talking about, what Dr. Group was talking about as far as light, sound, and vibration and how that works. But one of the messages I really want everyone to understand is that you have a light body that communicates at the cellular level. I'm going to show you through science why that is true. This used to be a metaphysical concept. People used to say, I am light. But now we know science has proved that we are. And by the end of this short presentation, you'll understand more about it as well. And maybe it'll lead you to go do some research and why it's so important that we physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually all line up so that, and I don't believe any of these pieces can be done without, just as a little disclaimer, I'm also a user of Dr. Group's technology as far as helping my liver, and he's been helping me tremendously. So even though I'm going to be talking more about the mental side, the emotional side, what got me into this business was the physical side with an iridologist and teaching my mother about getting our 9 kids, my brothers and sisters, off sugar, white flour, and dyes. So I'm right in line with that. I mean, you can't think your way out of a bad diet. So we need to make sure that that's in alignment too. So that's just my little disclaimer for you, Dr. Group, so people understand that this is an additive program, not a take away from program or something like that. And I don't think there's in one silver bullet. So you have to be balanced in all these different areas. So as we go on, one of the things that we have 5 layers to our energy field, and we can now measure most of these things. So it used to be that we had to count on like people who were spiritually tuned and they could tell us things, but it starts really with our spiritual energy. So you can't be more of that. You are what you are. But what we want to do is we want to realize more of that into the physical plane. So in order to do that, we need to align our mental energy, which means we need to keep our thoughts positive, productive. You brought on right at the very beginning the fear that we're under. The worst thing you can do to the human body is produce fear, anxiety, and lack of hope. These things shut down the most powerful pharmacy on earth, the human brain. So what happens is nothing works as well. You know, when you're under fear, that fight or flight takes over and your body just can't metabolize, digest, or use that information. Then we go to our emotional body. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today too, in something called psychoimmunology, because your psychology literally affects the way your gut, which is your immune system, operates in your world. So it's definitely tied to it. And these 2 brains that can work independently, but if we can get them working together, it becomes a powerful force for our health and healing. And then we have our etheric energy. This is what some people see, and now what science is calling biophotic discharge, which I have a slide, so I'm going to not go into too much here, but I want to let you know that this is where science gets kind of spooky. The science is showing that we literally are not the same person. So whoever showed up to watch this at the beginning, you're not going to be the same person when we're done, and you wouldn't even if you weren't watching this. So what we visualize, what we realize, what we eat, what we breathe, the people we hang around, this is all playing into who we show up as every 40 seconds. And I'm going to explain that as we go on. So then we have physical energy. And what my whole point here is that everybody's looking for physical energy, but we live in an energy system. And if we are in alignment with all of these things, the energy flows to, through, and around us. And we have this infinite energy source. There's no shortage of supply. So just kind of think in terms, even though you might find yourself on one of those different levels having difficulties right now, that's why we're on Earth, right? I mean, if we didn't have any of these problems, we wouldn't be here right now experiencing all the things that are going on in our world. So there's two different brain states that I want you to become familiar with. One is called the surviving brain, and one is called the thriving brain. Unfortunately, with everything that's going on from 2020 even into today, people are putting their brains into survivor states by choice. They're turning on the network news. The biggest thing I tell people is if you're feeling too good, feeling too healthy, too happy, please just turn on the news. In less than 5 minutes, you're going to be depressed because they're going to show you all the things that you can't do anything about. So we need to stay focused. We need to turn on that thriving brain. And the reason I have the light switches here, it would be so nice if we could just flip the switch to go from the survivor brain to the thriving brain. But no one taught us how to do that. Growing up, unless you were trained by someone to actually use your physiology and your psychology in the proper ways, you basically let life happen to you instead of life happening through you. So hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll understand how you can turn these switches on and off. There's a time we want to be in survivor mode, but there's most of the time we want to be in the thriving mode so that we can occupy. We only learn, grow, and develop through stress. So I'm not saying you're going to eliminate stress. So we need to stress out the body a little bit every now and then just to keep it healthy. Now, when we talk about conscious states, these are the different states that you go through every day. So unconsciously, you're sleeping. So think of that as when you fill up your spiritual energy bank. If you get good sleep, then the body works better. We all can probably agree on that. Now, when you're in that state of what we call inventiveness, this would be sleeping state would be called delta. That's when you're in deep sleep, you're unaware of the world. We need those states of disassociation to stay sane. If we didn't have those, that's why as humans we look for the dopamine hits, and that's why the addictions are so big right now, is because people are trying to get outside of the stress and not let it control them. But if we get into the theta state, that's called the creative mind. That's the state where you read about these great inventors like Tesla and Einstein and Edison. They would dip into this state of inventiveness and reinvent their life. And that happens in the theta brainwave state. And then we have the alpha state, which we call the intuitive mind. This is the flow states that most of us have heard about, like professional athletes, or if you're doing something you really love and you're really good at, you're probably in that flow state. So you can probably see here that you want to be in the creative flow states more than any other state, but we can't really we can't drive down the road in those states. Although if you look to the right or left while you're driving, you probably see a few people in those states, they're unconscious, but most people unfortunately are in this reactionary state. This is the fear states. Those are the ones we want to get out of. And the reason I have the gear shift here is that our brain shouldn't work like a manual gear shift. It should work like an automatic gear shift. If our nervous system is functioning appropriately, when it's time for sleep, we down-regulate, we downshift everything. We're able to sleep through the night. We go through the different cycles of sleep, which I'll explain in a moment. And then we get up, we have energy, we go about our business. But unfortunately, what happens to an underperforming nervous system is it down-regulates and it just doesn't have the resources, the energy resources to do it. It's not capable of making that ATP or that energy transition. Now, if you're too energized, which a lot of people are because they get super excited, if you're the type of person that you start talking about political or religious views and you get all angry and upset, then we need to work with you, because those are two things that are just emotionally charged. They push buttons on people. so what we want to do is we want to teach you to move between these states as gracefully as a dancer, not like a brute force. We want to make it a flow state. So we want to have an automatic transmission, if you will, for our nervous system that regulates between three different, we're just going to generalize here, three different areas. We have the sympathetic system, which is our fight or flight. We have our parasympathetic, which is that thrive, digest, rest, and relax. And then we have our neurohormonal. Unfortunately, what happens to most people on our planet is their neurohormonal is running the whole show. That's why they got to reach out to Dr. Group and get some help, because the biological system will wear out. I mean, unfortunately, if we don't keep the toxins out, we don't put the nutrients in, the cells don't have a choice. They have to die. So if we want to keep them alive, we have to detox first. We have to get them nutrients. We have to give them air and sunlight and all of these things that our body needs. If not, then we're gonna basically start getting unhealthy. Usually it shows up first as adrenal fatigue and disorders like that, because the body is going to try to brute force power you through. And to give you one example, which I talk about a lot, is in the middle of the day at 2 o'clock, if you find that you're craving coffee, tea, or chocolate, then you're not able to regulate your nervous system, because your body dropped in temperature 2 degrees and basically set off a whole bunch of signals and alarms and everything like that, where these bodies were designed to be, just like what I'm showing here. Everybody came from the Serengeti, from Africa, our genetic makeup. So when we think about how our bodies are designed, we're designed to be resting at 2 o'clock. Just like the zebras, just like the lions, it's too hot in the middle of the afternoon. So even though we psychologically and mentally have evolved, and we have skyscrapers and airplanes and we've been to the moon, these bodies are still just as primitive as they were 200,000 years ago, when this brand of human, if you will, basically took out the others that were on the planet at that time. But at that time, stress was very different. Like we see here with the saber-toothed tiger. When you think about stress, we have stress express a lot during our day, and it comes from things like our mobile phone, things like that we have, TV news. So what happens is, when this prehistoric person is out hunting and gathering, they might 3 or 4 times during the course of a week confront something that was terrifying and would cause them to either fight or flee. We have the equivalent of that 3 or 4 times in the morning before we have breakfast, especially if you look at your telephone, or you're looking at your emails, or you turn on broadcast news. Our bodies were meant to get up, relax, get around, maybe do some stretching, some meditating, preparing yourself for results in your life, not just reacting to everything that happens. Now, the other side effect to our lifestyle is we sit on our butts all day. The new smoking is sitting is the new smoking, as they say. And the reason for that is these nervous systems that we have, not only are we supposed to be eating high nutritious foods, but they're designed to move and breathe. If we don't move and breathe, then bad things start happening to our nervous system, because our body starts to regulate around the inactivity, in which means it's a steady decline. We want to stay active. In fact, today, I'm sitting here today, I'm 60 years old, and I don't want to be sitting on the porch in my rocking chair as my grandkids play soccer and baseball. I want to be out there playing soccer and baseball. In fact, my grandkids always say, "Grandpa, do you know how old you are?" And I said, "You're asking me the age of my body. I'm infinite." So, we want to keep these bodies well, so we got to keep them moving and breathing and doing things. So instead of sitting here stressing like the picture, we want to get people up and moving. That's part of what the nervous system does. And this is called vibration, because if we don't have vibration or movement and breathing in our body, our lymphatic system ceases to flow. And that's where a lot of bad things happen, which if you follow Dr. Group, you already know that. So all these things are happening. So when you think about clearing out these systems, that's why we recommend things like yoga or Tai Chi, or even dance is really good. These are the people that, when we've measured their nervous systems, which we've done this, we probably measured over 30,000 brains and nervous systems over the last 10 years. And those 3 groups always tend to be the best, even without using our technology. I'm talking about just out of the box. They just function the way they're supposed to. Now, most people think of meditation like this. I'm going to go to the mountaintop, I'm going to see Jesus, or I'm going to see God, and all's going to be good. Like Saul on the way to Damascus, we're going to get hit by a bolt of lightning and our life is going to change. The reality is that meditation or relaxation techniques, we need these daily, just like we take a daily vitamin, because we need our daily vitamins because it cycles through our system, right? Nothing stays forever in our body. In fact, the bodies that are watching me today are no more than 2 years old. Most of your body is less than a year old. So as you think about it, your body is always changing. So are your thoughts. So when somebody says, is this something you have to do the rest of my life? I always say it's something you should have been doing your whole life, not just the rest of your life, because we're going to be confounded with stress. And the biggest thing people are missing in recovery and having a really abundant, joyful life is they don't recover. They don't take the time to offload all of the stress that they're having. That's the main reason people should pray before they eat. Not just because your religious leaders have told you to do it, but we know physiologically, if you prepare yourself for the food, you've relaxed the digestive system. Now it can do its job better. It can metabolize and digest the food. As long as you're in a stress state, when we don't recommend watching TV while you're, eating, because what happens is as soon as you derail or get hijacked by stress, your functioning gut, which is the most important part of digestion, obviously, goes offline because the blood flows out of that region of the body, and then you get half digested foods, which causes indigestion and other things. So now people do supplement for a period of time, but pretty soon you can't. You have to relax. Even when you're taking your supplements, we always tell people, just take a moment to acknowledge the intention of what those supplements are going to do, because we know the power of the brain and how it works with the body. If you just throw them in and think, oh no, this is a hassle, I don't really, you're actually programming those supplements to go against their nature. Their nature is to heal you, but you have the power to change it. So we always say the pill with the skill. So you want to take the pill and then gain a skill around it. So for instance, if you're taking supplements to help your adrenals, now you need to also find a lifestyle that's going to support that, not just take the adrenals and then push harder because you feel better. That's unfortunately what a lot of Americans do, because that's our nature too. We want victory at all costs. And unfortunately, how many people do we know that retire and expire? The average person doesn't even live 5 years after they retire. That is pretty sad. I plan on living to be 240. Dr. Group and I will be doing seminars at 200 together, because if you take care of yourself on a daily basis, and I only say that because the ancient Coptics said that our bodies are designed to live to be 247 years old. So I'm going to hang on to that one. And this is a group of people, Dr. Group, if you don't know about them, they actually studied the body through science of nutrition from the moment someone was born to the moment they died. And somebody would eat a certain way for their whole life, and then they would cut them open and find out what happened. Now today, what's so great about our technology today, we can do this on a daily basis. We can do this with different technologies they never had. So they had to wait a whole lifetime to cut somebody open to see what was happening. We can do a lot more today with our technologies and what's happening. Now, in the past, what would happen? Let's say that we're a tribal Indian and we're moving across the plains and we're hunting and gathering during the day, and we come back to the village and we're probably pretty stressed. If we got something, we're stressed because we're joyful, we got the buffalo or whatever. But if we didn't get something, we're even more stressed because now they're depending upon you to feed them. If you're hunting and gathering, you found the berries, again, the same thing. But at night, what they did that we don't do enough of is they found a way. If you've never done a drum circle, I always recommend people doing it because it's a cool experience. What happens is when that drum circle, when the master or the shaman of the tribe starts beating the drum, our brain starts to hear it and synchronizes with it. That synchronization works in the same way as a lot of drugs do, because it gets you outside of that beta state, that fear state, that survivor mode. So what happens is they have the fire going, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. They have the dancing going, they have the breathing, they have the drums. Basically, we're taking what I did with BrainTap is I looked at what is ancient traditions and how can we modify them into modern technology, because unfortunately today, we don't have the tribal communities anymore. I mean, we have our tribes, people we hang out with, but we're not with them every day. I mean, imagine you're with a group of nomads, and every day you broke down your tents and you moved to the next place, and you had to have a lot of teamwork and a lot of working together. So you had to figure out ways to keep the stress down, because stress will escalate when you're among groups of people. So in the background, you should be able to hear just the slight pulsing sounds. What I did is of course, I'm not going to use a drum, but in the background, you should be hearing what is called binaural beats and isochronic tones. They're all mixed in with some solfeggio frequencies. This is a frequency response that happens, and Noget frequencies. That together creates the same kind of shamanic response as if you were doing a drum circle. Now, I'm going to explain a little bit further later, but it's working with the brain, what we call the limbic brain. It's listening for deep cortical responses. Our hearing, as you're listening to me right now, our hearing in the world around us, we're listening to 25,000 or more pieces of information every second. But the problem is we can't identify all those. So our brain basically says, I'm only going to listen to this certain piece of information. Most of that actually comes from your eyes. Your eyes represent 30% of your hearing. So if you've ever been in a lecture and you couldn't hear the lecture, but then you adjusted your view and then you could see the lecture, now you could hear them, that's because the eyes activate different regions of the brain. So when I show you in a moment here what we're talking about by activating the retinal flashing, we're doing that to activate more of your brain's potential. Just listening is good, but as soon as you close your eyes, this frontal lobe shuts down. It's designed to do that so we can go to sleep. But in meditation, that's the problem people have with meditation. You don't want to shut that down. You want to stay aware. That's why they call it enlightenment, because you basically realize that energy flows while you're breathing, relaxing, and you don't have to go to sleep to do that. Most of us just go to sleep and let the unconscious take over. Now, sunlight is so important. So as we look at sunlight, the sunlight in the morning and the sunlight in the evening is so important that there's been research that shows if you can go out and do sun gazing, you can actually reset your gut biome. You heard me right. You can look at the sun in the morning and in the evening, about 10 minutes each way as it goes down and as it rises. And that light actually through your eyes, because your eyes are not just attached to your brain, your eyes are brain matter. So it absorbs through something called photobiomodulation, the right frequencies of light. Now, the key frequencies are between 470 nanometers and 860 nanometers of light. That happens to be blue light, red light, and infrared light. Those are the most important. So if you've done any research into light therapy or lasers, then you know that our community of doctors that are into wellness are really finding out a lot about light. And one thing that I learned, Dr. Group, that I didn't know when I spoke in DC was there's somebody who has something called Braxin Blue. I met him in Orange County, and it's actually a light activated medicine, I guess is the best way to say it, that is mixed with some colloidal silver and gold. And it's been found to eradicate Epstein-Barr, Lyme's, and they did a test with 400 people in Mexico on COVID. So it's approved in Mexico for COVID, not in America, but this is something they're finding that light activates different. Now this is this methylene blue, which you probably heard about before. It's only 10% of that, but that's been used for over 110 years for like malaria and things like that. So these creative doctors now are finding ways to use light to stimulate medicines. Now it's a medicine, but I don't know if it's owned by the pharmaceutical community, but it's basically right now you have to get it through a doctor because it's the way it's processed. But what I'm trying to say here is that medicine is going to be becoming more and more like Star Trek. You put the right chemicals into the system, the right biology into the system, everything like that, and the body knows how to use it. Then when we activate it with light, and when I heard it, I said, that makes a lot of sense based on what I'm going to show you in just a moment about how the body works and things of that nature. Now, why is it important to have fires, or what do we have this slide here for? Most of us have had an experience, especially when we're younger and we're trying to impress a significant other. We go ahead and we light a fire and we sit by there and we start relaxing. Well, what you're doing is you're setting the environment, because as soon as that fire starts crackling and popping and you're looking at it, your brain has to match that. So what's happening here is the minute that fire starts, your brain says, wow, that's a fire, and starts to look into it. And that fire is moving at 10 hertz frequency. That happens to be alpha. So then our brain instructs our gut, which is because our gut makes 95 or more % of our neurotransmitters. At that moment, it starts to create more acetylcholine. That happens to be one of the main neurotransmitters when you fall in love. So if you've ever heard somebody say, I love campfires, or that's because chemically they've been basically introduced to a chemical that's going to have them do it, and there's something called transference. So we know that happens. Now, our planet actually vibrates and resonates as a isochronic tone generator, which means it has beat frequencies. If we could listen to it, we would all hear it. But if we were to come at the Earth from a spaceship, we could measure 0.01 to 100 hertz frequency around the planet. For instance, a volcano erupting is around 100 hertz frequency. There are places on the planet that are so calm, so relaxed, they call them dead zones, that actually resonate at about 0.01. They just don't, there's no energy there. So it's just there, but there's places that are teeming with energy, other places that are dying off. But our brain knows, because that's the way it works through frequency following response. We have little cilia on the brain that looks like hair-like follicles, and it's always measuring our environment, just like that spaceship would. But when we walk into an environment, we start to match that environment. We all know people that during the holidays don't want to go into the mall because of the frenetic pace and how stressful it is and things like that. That's because even in that experience, our body's matching it. So if there's a lot of it, if you've probably heard of the group rage, you know, when enough people, what happens is basically they're all tuning into that same frequency. And that's why it's so important that we keep our frequencies in a state of grace and love and gratitude and things like that, so that we create that field around us. And I'm going to go into a little more detail on that in just a moment. Now, because not all of you have seen the BrainTap, I want you to just hallucinate with me just for a moment that you're putting this on, because this is what we're talking about. Then the rest of it will make sense. So when you put it on, you'll see the lights. Your eyes are closed. Now, the photic discharge of a 470 nanometer blue light, this isn't enough to do anything to your circadian rhythm. But what we find is that it resets the circadian rhythm. It's a very small dose. If you think of 8 LEDs, the computer screen, if you're looking at that, probably has 1,200 and something 28 times 760. You're talking about literally thousands of LEDs. So this is a very low dose light, because we're going directly into the brain. Your eyes are closed. Your brain is getting photic information that is absorbed by the hemoglobin in the eyes and directly into the brain, which means now if there's a cell that's suffering from apoptosis, which all cells do at some point, that's called cell death, then that cell actually works like a magnet and attracts that photic energy and then exchanges, and that cell starts the Krebs cycle. Basically, it re-instructs the cell and produces vasodilation through nitric oxide release, all of the good things you hear about that we need for our brain, because the problem with our brain is the blood flow and circulation issue, especially stress, causes that, but also traumatic brain injuries. And we've all had those. So even though you might not remember it when you were growing up, and I had to be reminded when I had my grandkids when they were littler, then now they're 11 and 8, so they're not falling down all the time. But when they hit, when they hit the tables or they hit the floor, I'm all freaking out. But when we're younger, we can bounce back. As we get, better looking and more intelligent with age, our brain doesn't return so quickly. So we've got to do something to heal that brain, and we need to get nutrients into that brain. And we do that by delivering the light into the system. Now, most of you might know about music therapy. Hopefully you've heard about it. What we did, we just did a recent study at BrainTap, and it's a bigger study now in Brazil. We have 11 different universities we're working with. They're doing this study because we know music, something called the Mozart effect. While you're listening to music, your brain literally works better. You are smarter when you listen to this classical Baroque music, or now the new age kind of music without the drums. You put that in the background, your brain works better. What we wanted to see was, we know the music works while it's playing. Does it work when it's not playing? And what we found, we did a 45-minute session. We put people on for 5 minutes. We measured their heart rate, just like what you did, Dr. Group, when we were together. And then we can measure across time. So the next 5 minutes, we played a piece of music that we know is relaxing. And yes, it did. It showed a parasympathetic increase, sympathetic downregulation. Everything was great. But at the end of that 5 minutes, every one of our test subjects went right back to the stress they had before. It didn't entrain the brain at all. It was just music, gave them a great experience, like going to the movies, and it was really good, but it wasn't life-changing. We took that same piece of music, we encoded it with the algorithm I'm going to tell you about. We found out that not only did it last 5 minutes, but it had a halo effect of 72 hours, which means we trained the brain to be in that state all the time, not just while you're listening to music. And that's why we weave in the different sound frequencies that I'm going to talk about. So you understand it's not just because some people say, well, it's the music that's doing it. So we wanted to rule that out. It's not just the lights either. It's the combination of everything that I'm talking about. It's kind of like you can't just do one thing to keep your body healthy. You've got to do many things to keep your body healthy, because we're not getting the nutrients from our soils, and we're not getting, even the water that we drink, right? We have to buy water that's been purified. Now, when we go to the ocean, we've all had the experience where we didn't really want to go, but somebody dragged us to a lake or an ocean. When we get there, we might not feel so good at first, but while we're sitting there, our body is in training to those waves. So as the waves come in, our body will start to settle down. The ocean has a frequency. Water itself has a frequency of 10 hertz frequency. So the bigger the body of water, the bigger the entrainment. That's why 90% of all people on Earth live within driving distance of the water. It's kind of like a hummingbird. Our brain doesn't want us to create settlements in the middle of the desert. It wants us to create settlements close to water because, obviously oxygen's number one, water's number two, nutrients are number three, as far as how long we can go without them. Now, we can't go without any of those three for a long period of time, but our brain, our physiology is literally designed to have us crave and want water. Now, of course, we can pervert that by drinking a lot of sodas and things like that, or be programmed by, I saw an ad somebody brought me the other day that showed 7-Up back in the 30s. They were saying, love your child, make them smarter, serve them 7-Up. I'm going, are you kidding me? This was the way marketing works. So when people tell me about any drug marketing now, I just show them those kind of old time photos. I'll say, it's marketers, it's not reality, but we want to be in the right state to get those right results. Again, this is what people think meditation is. If you were to be sitting here with her, just relaxing, she's sitting at about the tree line. At the tree line of a mountain is 7.8 hertz frequency. Most people that know about frequencies know that's the Schumann frequency, the frequency of our planet. So our planet resonates at that frequency. So that would be our grounding frequency. If you've ever heard somebody say, I just feel like I need to be grounded, I feel scattered, that's because their theta is not in place. Now, the nice thing about theta is it produces something called GABA. So I shouldn't say it produces, basically it instructs the gut to produce GABA because it doesn't do anything. It's kind of like the computer really doesn't do anything. It receives the signals, so our biological system is doing that thing. When she's sitting here in that theta state, when somebody looks at a guru and they go, well, I want to be like a guru. Well, the gurus just intuitively or through some other scientific means figured out that if they could meditate in a cave, in the mountains, basically they're just sitting in the theta state. So, and now what does GABA do? GABA is a precursor to DMT, which is, we all have DMT receptors in our brain. That's why we hallucinate, we visualize and do those things. Now, some people take it, as a supplement or as a experience. That's different than what I'm talking about. But the only reason we have those experiences, like a psilocybin even, is that our brain has receptors for them. So because I mentioned the psilocybin, I'll mention, we just finished a study with Dr. David Rosenthal out of Dallas with PTSD with a psilocybin in BrainTap. And we had a number of people that didn't want to take the physical psilocybin because they were addicts and they didn't want to maybe form an addiction to it. We mapped out the brains of those people doing a psilocybin, and we found out they had high levels of gamma. Gamma is a high frequency that used to be associated with high anxiety. Now they're associating with super intuition, super inventiveness. Healers have it. most healers, hands-on healers that we see. So this high-level gamma, so what we did is we designed the gamma sessions that Dr. Group was talking about based on that. And we've had people who've had a psilocybin type experiences just by listening to those sessions, because it's really our brain that does it. Just like all allopathy, when they give you a medicine, basically they're putting it into the pond and they're going to see how the pond responds. If the pond responds well, they go, oh yeah, this medicine's for you. If the pond doesn't respond well, it says, well, try this one. And they just keep throwing pills into the pond until they find the one that reacts. But it's really the pond that's reacting. So you think of your body like that pond. Your body reacts the same way it reacts to light, sound, and vibration. We've got to get, and we've tested this over 30 years, so we know it happens. So here's one of our studies we did. We took 100 adults. These were volunteers. They were 55, 65 years old, never meditated. That was important because some people get a preconceived method of that. What we found out was during this study that we had a 39.8% decrease in stress on the very first session. Now, that's what we published with NIH. This is their alternative medicine conference. But we followed that study. Now we have 300 people in this study, and we showed that if they continue to do this at least 3 times a day, this becomes their baseline, which means now they operate with these high levels of efficiency just out of the box. I mean, wake up in the morning, your body's functioning correctly. So when you think about it, we can measure 9 different neurological parameters in as little as 5 minutes. So we do the pre and the post, and we find out what happens. So what we're finding is that 100% of the people after 3 sessions will start to regulate upward, which means their parasympathetic will go up, or vagal tone, for those that are familiar with that, will improve so that their body regulates appropriately through their stresses. So this is what we show. This is the main thing, 38.5% reduction in stress. And this was such a profound result that Duke University, which we work with, and a few of the other colleges, they just can't believe it. There's not too many things that can do this without flying you to Hawaii and watching waterfalls and rainbows. So obviously you can do that, but usually it takes a little bit of time to get into that state. Now, when we talk about science, I'm not going to go through all of these different parameters, but we can now measure the body because we have technology. I didn't invent the technology. I had the scientists create a platform for us, but through heart rate variability, we know that our brain is up here. But when they had the gurus like Swami Rama at the manager's clinic, they're measuring his brain and all this. He says, why are you measuring here? I'm here. And he's pointing at his heart. And now we know, this was back before this was found out, our heart actually has 4,000 neutrino cells, which means our heart has a brain. That's the brain that controls the system. And just like our gut can operate without the brain in our head, right? If somebody is a paraplegic, they still have digestion and they still have all this. So that's why they call that the second brain. You can kind of think of this brain as the third brain, but this brain actually controls both of them. Because obviously if you get shot in the heart, you're dead instantly, right? But they can measure that in between that measurement, because we know the heart's frequency, which is magnetic, which is a strong frequency band that surrounds every person. The brain's frequency is very minor. A very low frequency or voltage. So we have to put probes on the head and measure those. So we can get something called ECG, which is through the electrocardiogram, we can actually get brainwave function. Now we can't get right and left hemisphere. That's where we have to use something like the WAVI or other technologies. But I just want to show you what happens when somebody's using BrainTap. So I've already mentioned this a little bit, all the different universities we're working with. The main one I want to talk about today, all these universities are doing different studies, and I don't have time to go through them all. You can go to braintapresearch.com if you feel so inclined to look at all the research. But the one that I'm most eager to see the result, we're getting some really good results because they're doing blood serum levels. In Brazil, the Brazilian government is actually paying for a study over $250,000 to prove that BrainTap is a digital drug. Now, we don't do any drug testing, but what we do is we can upregulate or downregulate 54 different neurotransmitters during a session. So because we can prove that on 100% of the people, their pharmacology department is treating the study in the same way you would do a study with a drug. And we're getting some fantastic results. They're doing blood serum levels. They're doing, of course, questionnaires. We're doing brain scans. But the whole idea for the Brazilian government, which is actually a socialized medicine, they want to be able to give anybody with a mood disorder the BrainTap. And of course, I want them to do that too, because I'm a manufacturer. So that sounds good, but it's also going to help them. We're doing the same thing in India at NIMHANS, India, which is the National Institute of Mental Health. It's the largest mental health hospital in the world. They see over 1,000 new patients every day. So, India, we want to talk about numbers, you get numbers there. And they're using the BrainTap there to basically help the people they can't help, because there's so many people coming, and they're putting them in tents outside of the hospital that they can have them go through a BrainTap session and downregulate that sympathetic, and they can start healing. Because as long as you're locked in that sympathetic cycle, you're not going to heal. You're locked out of the healing cycle. Now, why is it so important to get out of that healing cycle? If you've never read the book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, I always recommend it. So imagine you're waking up in the Serengeti, you're a zebra. You don't want to be the slowest zebra that day. You want to be at least the second slowest, because the slowest zebra might be dinner. But what happens in the book, and what Sapolsky was showing, was that these zebras, they're being chased by that tiger in the picture. As soon as that tiger stops, even though they're only 2 or 3 feet away, and the tiger stops, the zebra stops almost instantaneously, puts their head down and starts eating grass. The lion could at that moment just pounce on them and kill them, but it doesn't. It's like, game over. I'm tired. I'm going back into the shade. And the zebra says, okay, game's over. It's I tell people it's like Tom Brady, who can throw 3 interceptions in the first half, but then throw 4 touchdowns in the second half. These zebras don't hold on to stress like people do. When we get stressed out, unfortunately, we form committees, we form groups, we get badges, we start telling everybody about it. We start identifying with the dis-ease instead of creating a solution. So stress is stress. We're not going to eliminate that, but what we want to do is build up our immunity to stress by doing something that offloads stress on a daily basis. If you let it build up, think of your body like a capacitor. A capacitor, an electronic circuit, actually holds a charge until a certain discharge point. Now, for us, that discharge point usually is a person, like someone who loves us, that's going to take us back. We don't discharge on the police officer that's pulling us over for doing 10 miles over the speed limit. We wait till we get home and little Jimmy gets it, or our spouse. So that's why we don't want to do that. We want to discharge naturally. We don't want to discharge on our family or friends. And the reason that we need, after stress, if you have prolonged stress, you're compromising your immune system. Most of you probably know your immune system is in your gut. That's where the immune system lives. And if your gut isn't healthy, you don't have a good immune system. But we also have biome in our mouth, we have biome in our brain, we have biome in our gut, and they're all related. If you have leaky gums, I guarantee you have leaky gut. I guarantee you have leaky brain, because they all mirror each other. And so let's say that when you have a stressed event, if you don't calm everything down, that inflammation goes out of control. It's like a wildfire in California. Doesn't matter how many people you put on it, until that burnout happens, they're just going to keep going. So that's why training yourself to de-stress before you get into these maximum stress situations is so important. I mean, when you talk to any athlete out there, a professional athlete, they train for all those contingencies, so that when it is 30 seconds left and they got the ball in the 40, or whatever the scenario is, they've already role played it. They already know what to do. They've rehearsed it. They've done it. So many people just let life happen to them. So we want to make sure you learn how to have life happen through you, not to you. Now, the other thing is that Dr. Emoto, if you've never seen his materials, he wrote a book called The Secret Life of Water. And he's no longer with us, but his research lab is still there. And we were very fortunate. I interviewed their researcher just a couple of months ago, because I wanted to know, what does COVID look like in water? And I meant to bring that in here. I don't think I have it. No, it's not in this one. But if you go online and just put Dr. Emoto COVID, you can see the COVID. It looks like a demonic crystal that happens when you have that. If you have fear with COVID, it even looks worse. I mean, it's like destroys the body. But if you put COVID in gratitude, it neutralizes COVID. And I love to share that, because if you go there and learn about it, you have the most powerful pharmacy on earth between your ears. But don't give away your remote. to somebody else as far as fear goes. So when we talk about thoughts, that's the key here. You've got to keep your thoughts positive. There's always a solution, and light will sooner or later win. We have to get rid of the trauma. So we have a lot of trauma out there, not just from what's going on. Some people are even taking the vaccine and things of that nature. They might be getting the EMF. All of those things are happening. That's causing trauma to the body, and we have to heal that. We have toxins in the body, and of course, Dr. Group has the technology for that. I'm doing his liver cleanse. I'm on my third one now. So we're going to get my liver back working the way it's supposed to, because toxins are so important. And I didn't even realize myself how important certain cleanse programs are, but we've got to get the toxins out. There's a story out there. I'm still looking for the research, but they say that at Harvard, they kept a chicken heart alive for 35 years. What they did was they made sure it had light and oxygen, but they also made sure it was detoxed and it had nutrients. They said they could have kept that chicken heart alive forever, but a janitor didn't turn the power on. They had a power outage and didn't turn it back on, because cells aren't designed to die. They're designed to recycle, because energy likes to recycle and stay present. But if there's too much poo, then there's no place to learn, grow, and develop. The cell's going to die. Our digital lifestyle does it, right? There's something called digital dementia. If you look at somebody looking at their cell phone while they walk, and you look at somebody who has dementia walking, you're going to see those are very similar, because our physiology affects our psychology. So we want to keep our physiology straight. Don't walk and talk on your phone, and try to do things, and try to give yourself certain times of using digital devices, not just whenever they come in. Now, we talk about rest, relax, reboot after periods of stress. We bring in sports all the time. We work with a lot of professional teams. This happens to be Sporting Kansas City. It's a professional soccer team. They have a national training and coaching development center. Anybody from all over the world can come in. It's a 200 square foot facility where they bring people in and they rehab them for soccer. So they put in a 20 station BrainTap room where, when they're done, now what we did was we showed them, we can measure their energy input before the practice. And then when they just ended the practice, they would deplete their energy by it was almost like down to 20%, 25%. And that's normal. When you exercise, you're going to stress out the body, and it's going to show up in your HRV. But when they did this program with the BrainTap and with the lymphatic drainage boots, what they found out was they could reclaim over 80%, some of them up to 100% of the energy they had before practice. So what that meant is they could then leave, instead of being tired or doing an energy drink, which is probably the worst thing you can do for your system. And a lot of the post-workout supplements people take is just total garbage. And we were showing them how, they brought in all their stuff. And I said, why don't you take that and we'll see what happens. Every one of their supplements that wasn't healthy. Now, there were some people that had some really healthy supplements they took, but I would say 95% of them were pouring total garbage into their system after their workouts and really stressing out their body. So they weren't helping them like they thought, but they were synthetically, like they say, they used to do this with horses. If you're taking your horse to the market, you'd give that horse some caffeine. And then when it showed up to be bid on, the horse is standing up straight and neck. And then the person buys the horse, gets it home the next morning, and the horse can't even raise its head, because it was just through science. It was holding its head up, not the reality. So we want to have the reality of our electrical system working for us. Now, Hebbs Law, he states that all neurons that fire together wire together, but on the negative side, if neurons fire apart, they wire apart. So this efficiently means that if you don't use your brain, you lose it. And in my first book that I wrote back in the 90s, 94, it was called The Awaken the Genius, we told the whole story. When you're born, you're actually fully connected. That's why you can learn languages easier. You can do different, you learn, you implement. As we get older, unfortunately, our brain unwires. It doesn't wire like people think. We actually unwire our brain so that we get our patterns and habits. That's why we create certain dialects to our speaking. And if you're one of the lucky ones, like our science officer, his name is Francisco Cedral, he speaks 6 languages fluently. So when we went to India together, at the end of the trip, 3-week trip, he's speaking Hindi. And I said, Francisco, when did you learn Hindi? He said, I didn't. I've just heard it enough over the last 3 weeks. That's the way our brain is designed to work, not take 3 years to learn a language. But his brain circuit had been used so much because in Brazil, they taught many languages. In America, when I was growing up, Another language is only taught by high school. So I learned Spanish so I could learn, cerveza in baños. That's about it. So, or cochino, so I could go get it. There's not many words that I know because I learned it not in the proper way, but our brain is so much more powerful than we know that it can learn things so much quickly. So what happens to the brain? How can you calm it down? This happens to be actually a good brain scan. So what we're looking at here is the delta, that they're at 41%. This means while they're awake, 41% of the brain wants to go to sleep. Believe it or not, that's a low delta score when I'm measuring people. Most people are above 70%, which means that old saying that said the masses are asleep, we've actually proved that they are because of inflammation. Because their body they're trying to put out the fire, and the brain knows, hey, you need to go to sleep so we can reboot. Unfortunately, it's a little bit like a Microsoft operating system. Our brain works best if we can reboot it, but the problem is that we keep wanting to go further. We want to do coffee or tea or chocolates or any other stimulant. This is when we need to really train the electrical system. Now, after one BrainTap session, this is this person's brain. Now, this happened at 2:00 in the afternoon. And the reason that we did it at this time was at 2:00, our temperature drops 2 degrees. That's when we're supposed to be sleeping. So the brain shows that. But what happens is most people will go get a stimulant instead of going to sleep. So what we did is we had them do a power nap using light, sound, and vibration and boosted their brain back to almost a perfect brainwave. Now, perfect brain, we call it a symphony of brainwaves because there's no one brainwave that's more important than any other. But while you're awake, you should have about 45% beta and 25% alpha, we find is what's the master brainwave. The rest can kind of fall away like a mountain. But you can see that they were able to bring their inflammation down from 41 to 14 because that's a good sign there on delta. Now, in the book, Saving Your Brain, which is written by one of our doctors, Dr. Kelly Miller, we found out that the brain can change at any age. We did a study of women 55, 65. They all had dementia. They all were given the Cambridge Science testing. They all scored on the dementia scale. They all had the problem with the brain that we see in dementia. The left hemisphere is moving slower than the right hemisphere, which means we don't have balance. We don't have that cohesion that's necessary, that the competence of the brain. So information's flowing differently. So we sent them to their doctors. Remember, they're all diagnosed. We only did BrainTap. Now, if we did more things like supplementation and other therapies, we would have got even better results. So that's what we're doing now. We have a 150-person study going on, but this was just a small study in Florida, in Tampa. And what we found was after 6 weeks of morning sessions, what we call digital coffee, afternoon sessions, which we call reboots, and in the evening, we have the go to sleep sessions. They did that so they could regulate their brain, teaching their brain when to be awake, teaching their brain when to reboot, teaching their brain when to sleep. After 6 weeks, their hemispheres were synchronized because the first 4 minutes of any BrainTap session is a synchronization session, trains the brain to work together, all in different ways. So they did that, but at the end of that 6 weeks, their brain was synchronized. They took the Cambridge Science scores and tests. Now they scored in the normal range for their age. We were able to measure their neuroplasticity, which means how is their brain's electrical activity. We don't know exactly every neuron connection, but we do it by voltage. So we can tell, think of it as the brain speed. So when you go get a computer, you want a faster computer, not a slower computer. So we were able to change the brain speed by 49%, which means their brain sped up 49%. Now, the biggest thing we found in the study was something called a reorganization score. We all know somebody who has been compromised by dementia, or they're getting older, they get upset and angry, and they're still upset and angry 2 and 3 days later because they're not able to regulate. So we were able to change that by 58%, which means they were able to pull a Tom Brady. If they throw an interception, they were able to regroup and throw a touchdown, or whatever is the sport you want to use as the analogy, or a golfer. I often tell people if I could golf out of the rough like the pros, I would aim for it. So because they're able to reorganize their brain, they're not focused on the negative. One of the nice things that science is showing is that light, which is low cost, minimal side effects, it has very fast therapeutic effects. It's been used for antidepressant use. Now, this is literally based on flickering eye response. So this study was done with retinal flashing, exactly what BrainTap does. So this is a study that shows by using this therapy, you can actually begin to diminish those symptoms of depression, anxiety, and stress. Now we're proving that out. We've already proven out, which I think one of the slides are here. We've done mood disorder tests and showed upregulations in positive moods and things of that nature. And it's all based on the fact of something in psychology they call SAD, seasonal affective disorder, they call it. That's really a lack of sunlight, and it affects the vitamin D. So what we find is, even though we're not giving the right blue light for vitamin D, we do find that some people will upregulate their vitamin D just because they're more relaxed. But you can get that from the sun, and you can also supplement it in the right cases. Now, this is the neuroplastic change that happens to people when we're looking at just a neuron. So the reason we have the picture of the hippocampus is that in the A side being the one that's more active, the B side is as it atrophies, we lose those connections, is that the hippocampus has to do with turning short-term memories into long-term memories, and then the recall network. Everybody has a perfect memory. The problem is recalling that information. It's kind of like having the internet, but you don't have a good search engine. That's really what's happening in the brain. And so, and unfortunately, our society has proven that they don't care. They don't want to teach us how to think. They want to teach us what to think. So the more we can start thinking again, the better these neurons work as well. It's not just about different things. Also, exercise does this. So if you can get out and do, that's why the moving and breathing and things like that is so important. Now, how do we create neuroplastic change? So this is a picture of somebody using our BrainTap. We also have a gut pad, because if we're working with, this is also a light helmet she's wearing. So we're putting as much light as we can into the body, because we also know that there's gray matter in the gut. You have a thinking gut, and hopefully all of you know that already. But you have a gut brain that actually has more neuron connections in your gut than the brain between your ears. So we have to heal all of those at the same time. Now, what they'll typically do also in some of the clinics is they'll put one over the heart. If she didn't have a good heart rate variability, we'd put the light there, and it's 810 nanometer light and 660 nanometer light. So it's red and infrared light. And what we find is that starts to give energy back to the heart so that the heart can regulate like it was supposed to, which stress doesn't. So it has. When you think about what happens with the body, it has to be a unique stimulus. We only learn in stressful environments. So it doesn't have to be negative stress. It could be something called eustress. That's the enjoyable stress we have, like the stress of getting married. And you don't have to worry about the caterer and things like that. That's a different stress. But if you're having the joy of that, is the part we're talking about. It has to be novel. It has to be something that you don't see all the time, because that then triggers the default mode network to go offline. As long as it's something we're used to, we basically just run on autopilot. 95% of the time we're run on autopilot. But as soon as something shows up, I love what Deepak Chopra says. He says 95% of what's going to happen to you tomorrow, you know about today. That's why, but some people still pretend they don't know, like they eat the wrong foods, they think the wrong thoughts, all of these things, like they're going to somehow change that scenario. It all works together in that way. We also has to be enjoyable, or people won't repeat it. The nice thing about our app is we find the average user listens 28 times every month, and we only have 1% of our users ever drop. So they're getting use out of it, and that's even without using the headset. You can use our app with just the phone. So the problem can become the solution, and things of that nature. It has to be repeatable. So what we've done is every one of our 1,300 sessions is unique. There's no two that are the same. Now they're similar because there's only 5 brainwave states that we can train to, but how we get there, it's kind of like if you have an Apple GPS, you have Google GPS, you have Waze GPS, they all seem to take different ways to take you the same direction. So too, we want to do that with the brain, so we can train the brain to have that neuroplasticity. Now the key here is that we want to increase your energy. We live in an energy economy. If you can increase your energy, you're going to feel better. You're going to do everything you do better. And the reason I show this slide like this is that you control that energy flow. If you're thinking the right thoughts, getting the rest and the recovery you need, you're doing the proper supplementation, And I'm a firm believer that supplementation isn't an option. It's a must, because we're not getting the foods aren't giving us what we need. And especially as we grow older, our bodies needs change, and we're not getting the foods in season anymore. We get foods from all over the world that are sometimes good and sometimes bad. They've been eradicated. So we need to keep our energy up and know why we're doing this, focus on the positive, and know that we're light beings, just like I started the talk with. Now, how do we know that? Every one of our cells has something called chromophores. And as you look at the chromophores in the body, they're little batteries. Every cell has one of them. And how it works is, you're seeing me and you think I look like this, but the reality is I look like everything but this, because you're seeing the reflection, like the green light in the picture. That's what's reflecting. And people say, oh, the leaf's green. No, the leaf is actually red and blue and all the other colors of the spectrum, not green, because that's why it's reflecting it. But what happens with light in the body, the right frequencies of light, the body will store this energy. Now, it can only get so much energy. You can't push more energy than your body can absorb. It's like a battery. You can only charge a battery to 100%. So what we found is, like the ear lights that you saw, we can put those 9 LEDs, and the amount of light that they produce, or the photic energy discharge, is like a 3-minute laser session. Okay, so you can do the same thing in 3 minutes with a laser, but we're using low level light. So it's going to take longer. But what we find is it moves through the meridians of the body, because all the meridians go up and through the ears. Of course, they go up and through the eyes, they go up and through the palms, the heels. I mean, our body keeps reproducing itself in different ways. But the key here is to know that light, if you don't fill this light up, you don't produce the nitric oxide, the ATP that you need, and all the other things our cell needs for cell growth. Now, here's the part I was talking about at the very beginning. In 2003, they said, hey, we mapped the human genome. No, they didn't. They only mapped 1%. So imagine if you were graduating from college and you only answered 1% of the questions on your test. You couldn't say, hey, I passed the test. They'd say, what about the other 99%? Well, what they found out was they couldn't map the 99%, because every 40 seconds there was a ultra weak light emission, which now they're calling a biophotic discharge, that actually rebraids the 99% of DNA in our system. So basically, that light evaluates our environment on every DNA sequence and pulses light. Now, we know the science officer I talked about before, he actually created the clothing that Tom Brady sells, TB12. He sells clothing that reflects infrared back at you, because every one of you out there, actually, when you're in the room with somebody, you're actually broadcasting infrared frequency. That's why healers heal. We've proven that with science. Some people can channel more of this infrared light energy through their hands, and actually through your eyes is where it comes mostly too. So we broadcast light through these different places. But now we know that light is actually changing how we show up. So we know that 20%, we get 1,200, 500 genes from mom, 1,200 and 500 genes from dad, but that only controls 20% of our actual gene structure. The other 80% is controlled by our environment, the foods that we consume, the water we drink, the people we hang out with. All of that plays into, and it's all programmed every 40 seconds at the cellular level. So there is no junk DNA. There's only DNA that changes, but they don't know what it is, because you can imagine 75 trillion cells changing every 40 seconds. And they're not changing all together at 40 seconds. Maybe there's a trillion that change this second, that second. Think about it. Our bodies are changing so much. It would take a quantum computer to do that, and Google hasn't released that yet. So we have to figure that out later. So just know that that's why we always say, you're like with blood sugar, for instance, you're only one meal away from resetting your blood sugar. So, but you have to eat the right foods to do that. You can't eat a candy bar and think you're going to do that, because the body will adjust to the candy bar. All of those things, it'll adjust to the supplements you're taking. So as you do that, your body becomes very adaptive. And if we supply it with the right nutrients, the right thoughts, the right activities, our body knows how to reproduce itself with health in mind. into our old age. I mean, old age, I think we're all going to be witness to that centurions are going to become the norm if we can get through this little patch that we're going through. There might only be a few of us left, but that's what's going to happen, because we know the body, we're lasting longer because of the health choices we can make. We can actually improve our health sources. So mitochondria health right now is really key. And it also has to do with gene expression. If you don't have enough energy in the system, you can't heal. And it starts at the mitochondrial level, or think of it as the cell engine. If you don't have that, now that light, remember, our body works on light. So if you don't have that energy in the cell, we can't do anything. So what we talk about is, environments are good. Light, water, magnetism must be taken into account. The environment, remember, you can't think your way out of an unhealthy diet. So you have to eat a healthy diet, and you have to get sunlight because it affects your hormones. They say if you don't get to sleep before 8 at night, between 8 and 2 o'clock in the evening, 2 a.m., you don't produce melatonin because we're tuned to the light from our sun, so we need that. And EMF is damaging our body. So, there's all these different assaults. So we have to do things to keep our body detoxed, clean, and healthy the way it was designed to be used. We used to we all were intermittent fasters before because we didn't know where the food was coming from. We didn't get to go to 7-Eleven and get a hot dog or something. We had to go kill something or go find some berries or go find some food to eat. We didn't just get to go to the store and find something that was already packaged for us. Now, when I talked about mood, the biggest mood booster you have is during sleep. In 2016, the medical community finally admitted that we have a lymphatic system in the brain. If you look at any picture of the lymphatic system before 2016, you will see the lymphatic system stops at the brain, which is insane because if you had physiology in college, they told you that anywhere there's a blood vessel, there's a lymphatic vessel. But for some reason, because it doesn't turn on, there's the blood-brain barrier, there's something called the glial lymphomic system, and it only is triggered during REM sleep. We've also seen it could be triggered by certain supplementation. It can also be triggered by certain therapies. But if you're just out there living your life, and not doing anything like that, it only happens during level 4 sleep. So that's why it's so important that we get a good night's sleep. And that's the one benefit that BrainTap has, is that we've done so many sleep studies and showed, like we did a sleep study just recently with coal miners who spend 12 hours a day in the dark, underground, and their sleep is terrible because they don't have any of the processing of the sun. We improved their sleep by over 80% in a 6-week study. And first thing we had to do is get them off alcohol, because I couldn't believe these guys go to work drinking alcohol first thing in the morning, but they're from Australia. So I guess that's normal. It's normal what's happening. So when we talk about the world's greatest pharmacy, visualization triggers it. So we're using light, we're using sound, we're using vibration, but we're also using language. So when we think about language, when you visualize something once, it could have been an accident. If you visualize it twice and experience it in the world, now it becomes coincidence. But when you do it 3 times, this is when the brain starts to create the neuro mechanisms that put in place that wiring and firing process we talked about. So that's why we call it the power of 3. Anything you want to change, the quicker you can do it 3 times correctly, the quicker the process gets made. And also it has to be generalized into the future or it's meaningless. It's like I said, going to a movie is good, you get your stress reduction, but it's usually not life-changing. You might have had a few movies you went to that kind of got you thinking, but usually they don't change your life. Now, this is a good friend of mine. We bring him out to Quantum University all the time, where I'm the Dean of Brain-Based Studies, Bruce Lipton. If you've never read the book by Bruce Lipton, Biology of Belief, I always recommend it because what he says, and he's really big in epigenetics. He was touting epigenetics before anybody. But he knows that every atom, molecule, substance, it has its own unique oscillating pattern, which can be measured. It has a wavelength. Everything we see, our world is made up of particles, right? We don't see the wave. That's the consciousness that kind of animates. We call it the gap. Between each of the particles, there's a wave function. And then we get into quantum physics. But that's where our beliefs come in, because really the truth is that nothing happens without you. You animate the particles. that make reality happen. But without getting too esoteric, you need to be put into those states. That's why having the right brain state to evaluate your environment is so important, because if not, if you're evaluating your environment under stress, it's almost like wearing rose-colored glasses. Everything's going to be tinted with rose colors, instead of having a clear vision of what you're doing. Now, synchronization is so important, and scientists till to this day do not understand it. How you can if you put grandfather clocks all in the same room, they will synchronize within 3 to 4 minutes. There's a guy online, that's why I use metronomes. There's a guy online on YouTube that lines up 200 metronomes. They start them all at different times, and within 3 minutes, they're all synchronized. We live in a universe that wants to force synchronization. We actually have to do things like stay in our home, watch a lot of TV, eat garbage food, not exercise, to throw our body off. Because if we eat the right foods, we get outside in the sunshine, we ground, we take the right supplements, we do the right recovery, our brain literally knows it's self-healing and self-organizing, but we have to work really hard to disrupt that. And then those patterns become natural to the person doing them, but they're not natural to our body. Our body wants to be healthy. So how do binaurals work? If I send a 305 hertz frequency in one ear and a 295 hertz frequency in the other, your brain would not hear either of those two. It would hear a phantom sound of 10 hertz. That's what the cortical response is going to be in the brain. It's going to say there's a 10 hertz frequency, there's a 10 hertz frequency, but that's not even the most important part. In order to get the brain to train to that frequency, we have to move it. So it's like exercise for the brain. We call it brain fitness. Now we've layered that in with something called isochronic tones, which we'll get to in a moment. So here's how we measure heart rate variability. This is the same person we've been looking at before. This is 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They're at about 33% coherent, which your heart brain goes out of coherence while you're under stress or when you lose energy. So during the day, it's going to go out of coherence. So at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, that's one of the best times to do a BrainTap session. What happened to him? He went right back to 96%. Because all he was lacking was energy. What happens, it's kind of like your phone when you get low on energy. It says, we're going to put you on low power mode. The heart does the same thing. It says, we're going to put you on low power mode. You don't have the same energy that you need. So we're going to also, because the planet, as I said earlier, is actually an isochronic tone generator, it's pulsating these sounds and our brain actually picks it up. But not everybody is able to use binaural beats. Let's say that your hearing in your right ear is different than the left. Binaurals aren't going to work. But if we put what we found is when we put the isochronic tones in, we put the solfeggio frequencies and the Nogier frequencies in there, it's like an orchestra. The brain is able to follow along and move through these different frequencies. And the idea is to train the brain to move between them like an automatic transmission again, not so you're in alpha or in theta, but you're flowing through these different brain states so that you remain healthy under all conditions. So energy production in the brain, we're able to measure ATP production across the brain. Again, this is the same person. They were at 40% of their energy capacity. After the session, they went to 88%. So in essence, this person is getting 2 mornings. And most people will tell you they get more work done in the morning than the rest of the day. That's because you're high energy in the morning, especially if you had a good night's sleep. Let's talk about age in the nervous system. We have our actual age and we have our biological age. When Wayne Dyer said, never let an old person inhabit your body, what he was saying was, keep your body healthy, because even into old age, you can be young at heart, right? We've heard that before. So let's see what happens after a BrainTap session. They went from 62-year-olds to 34-year-old biologically. This is somebody who has a lot of energy and vitality. So this is one of the ways we measure at our clinics. We have 2,400 clinics across the country, and most of them have this technology. So they measure people when they come into the clinic, they measure them after therapy, and they show them how the therapy is working. Just as a disclaimer, though, if you do something like PEMF, you have to measure it 4 hours later because it really works out the body. And you never test HRV directly after exercise unless you want to see the stress response on the body, because you're not going to get the same reading. So just for those out there that know about heart rate variability, just as a disclaimer there. Now, metabolism is key. And this is a picture of Rob Powell when I was featured in People magazine in 2006. They came to me and they said, how many people do you have that have lost half their weight and kept it off for 5 years? We literally gave them over 1,000. they picked Rob Powell because he lived in Chicago where People Magazine was, and he was able to come down to the studio and talk to them. But he's still thin. If you look at my Facebook or Instagram, he's one of my friends on there, and he still looks like that because he changed his mindset and he changed the way his energy. He's eating better. He's taking the proper supplements. He's doing the things that his body needs to stay healthy. But what we showed was you see down here is metabolism. This isn't Rob. This is the same guy. This is a doctor who's 64 years old. He's bringing in 120 metabolic units of energy. He's bringing in 52, burning 68. This doctor is not overweight. If those numbers were flipped, he would be storing fat instead of burning fat. We can actually show that with somebody who's on a diet. We can show, hey, the foods you're eating are causing you to store fat instead of burn fat. But after the BrainTap session, he went to 363. He tripled his energy. He's bringing 149, he's moving 214. Metabolism is a sign of good health. So, they'll actually say, do you have an appetite, right? They're asking that question because the body's saying, hey, I need energy. Now, as we round this out, at the CES show, I don't have the slide here, but in 1989, when I invented the first portable light and sound machine, we were the only company out there doing it. We won the best new gadget of the year in 1989. Well, in 2019, we went back to the Consumer Electronics Show with our app. And they gave us the best health app of the year in 2019, which was good leading up to what happened in 2020, right? So this is the app that Dr. Group can share with you, the links and things like that, so you can get it for yourself. So that rounds out what I have to share, Dr. Group.
Well, that was amazing. And the thing is, I know Dr. Porter can talk for probably like 3 or 4 days straight on all this, just like we can talk about detoxification. But it really, from talking to him since our symposium, there is such a huge connection between detoxification, healthy living, stress reduction, sleep, and the brain. And I've been talking about how the gut is connected to the brain for quite some time. So what we'll do is we'll make sure that we put all the links down below for everybody so they can go check out Dr. Porter's research, all of his information on how you can order the BrainTap device, all the stuff that he has available. So we'll do that. And I just wanted to thank you. Thank you for your time. I mean, I know how busy you are, and I really appreciate you coming on today, sharing this information. It's all about just getting this information out to the world. I really love the metabolic ability of it. I love that I can go in and help with my meditations. That's what I use it for, the synchronization aspect of it. It's just been a long time coming before we have something that's just been proven multiple times that is not even that expensive, that people can use on a daily, multiple times during the day. I mean, I love the 2 o'clock in the afternoon thing. I tell you, I get so many people asking me, why am I so tired at 2 o'clock in the afternoon? And that's when people go run to Starbucks, or they go run and get, a big cup of coffee or energy drink or something like that. So just by being able to sit in a chair in a quiet place and to use the BrainTap for 15 or 20 minutes or 25 minutes, and just to be able to revamp in a natural way your energy and to give you that natural boost, it's absolutely amazing. So again, thanks for coming on. We all appreciate everything that you're doing, and have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, a wonderful year, a wonderful life.
All right. Thank you.